right, let's move on. We're going to talk next about KOTOR, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, probably one of the most beloved action RPGs ever released.
Yeah.
It has a huge fan base for a reason. It was announced this week, or not announced, it leaked. Rumors are swirling that EA is creating a remake of KOTOR.
You recall I said that I think there's another Star Wars game?
Did you know about this game already?
I did not.
You didn't?
I suspected, but I did not.
Is this a game you thought?
I thought they might be messing with this because
It's canon.
The new Star Wars canon has been flirting with KOTOR for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And okay, Rise of Skywalker was terrible, but I did go and pick up the visual dictionary for it because the visual dictionary has a bunch of backstory that wasn't in the movie on a bunch of characters and items and things like that. And one of the things that it talked about, and one of the reasons I picked it up, was it talks about the Sith troopers, which are the red stormtroopers that you saw in the previews and stuff. So each of those, the legions of Sith troopers, is named after an ancient Sith lord. The third legion is the Revan Legion, which means KOTOR's back in canon, motherfuckers.
They said that, though. They announced it, that they were trying to bring it back.
They are trying to bring it back, but that's they've referenced it. Rebels had a thing where they mentioned the Mandalorian Wars. The Mandalorian Wars with the Jedi are mentioned in the final episode of The Mandalorian. Very, very vaguely, but that's what they're talking about, is like when the Mandalorians fought these ancient sorcerers. Like, that's what they're talking about, is the setup, the war that happens before KOTOR. Like, that's what they're talking about. So they're definitely flirting around with it. Hell, as far back as 2015, I was at BioWare doing SWTOR stuff for a show and asked about how come they haven't shut you down, because SWTOR is the last vestige of the old pre-Disney era. They haven't shut them down. They're actually thriving. They're doing very well, and they're still going, but they are all technically not canon anymore, and that's the only non-canon thing other than reprints of the Legends comics and materials that Disney's allowed to continue to happen. And I'm like, what's the deal? And they're like, we think they like us. They just don't know what to do with us yet, but they're just sort of saying, hold on. And so I didn't know it would take 5 years, but it doesn't surprise me because KOTOR is great. Like, that era has been handled very well in the old EU, and the games I think have held up for the most part. I played KOTOR 1 again last year, and it's still great. KOTOR 2 is even better if you use the restoration patch to get the ending to work properly.
One thing I would say, though, about KOTOR, I went back and just played it briefly, like not that long ago, and the voice acting.
Yeah, it was another time.
For the Republic!
Yeah. And it was a lot of the same voice actors I would feel okay using now. It's just you'd have to direct them. You'd have to direct them differently because you can make things work better. It's not as stilted anymore.
Yeah.
You can have your main character talk, And I also remember that this codified how, like, the BioWare formula for 3D action RPGs that then translated directly into what Mass Effect was.
Yep.
Like, you don't get Mass Effect without
exactly. I mean, this was the stepping stone to Mass Effect. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, I think you're right in that you can't just remaster this.
No.
You have to remake this game.
Well, they are. Let me give you the details from the leak. So, most of the information that's been released so far is that it's not just going to be a remake of the first game. It's actually going to combine elements of both games. And it will be completely built from the ground up. It'll be modernized with new visuals. It'll be modernized for gameplay, control scheme, camera angle, all that kind of stuff. So it is going to be essentially a brand new project.
Which it needs to be.
It does need to be. I played this back when it came out. I loved it. I did find it a little hard to stick with it when I went back to
maybe a little more variety in the alien language.
Yeah.
Over to it's like, no, okay, you've said that 3 fucking shots in a row, and I know it doesn't mean all that shit that was in the subtitles.
Do you think
Matafa. Shut up.
Do you think the industry's ready for a game like this? Do you think it'll accept it?
I don't give a shit. I'm ready for it.
Well, I know that. I know that. That's a given.
I think Fallen Order proves that people are hungry for Star Wars content.
Yeah.
That isn't Battlefront.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think whatever you want to give them, people will eat it.
I mean, I think if you gave
Mandalorian proof,
any story-driven Star Wars content, it's going to do great.
Mandalorian proves it. Look at it. I mean, look how people are crawling over each other to get Baby Yoda merchandise. I mean,
it's true.
Star Wars still has that power if it's not made by hacks.
Yeah. That's been the problem.
Like, I don't know any other way to say it. Like, I hated Rise of Skywalker, but like at the same time, I was loving The Mandalorian, and I loved Fallen Order with all its flaws and rough edges.
Yeah.
And I still love KOTOR. Like, it's, you know, Star Wars is still great. You just gotta like find it
right.
and stop letting the guy who wrote Batman vs Superman write it. Like, that's the problem.
Now, as far as
What's Chris Avellone doing? Get Chris Avellone on the phone.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why Dying Light 2 got delayed. He had to do this.
Now, as far as pulling content from both of the games, how do you think they should handle that, and which game do you think should get more of an emphasis?
Well, I mean, I don't know what that really means.
I think maybe think about it in the context of canon, like important moments that they're going to need to make sure they include in this remake.
Well, the thing is that the entire premise of 2 is based on the outcome of 1. So like, when you say you're taking both things from both, what that says to me is you are just doing both games in one package.
Yeah.
Because the Jedi Exiles like situation in KOTOR 2 is completely a direct result of what the character in the first KOTOR does. Like, so unless you're going to combine those characters together, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I think you just have to tell the individual stories one right after the other. I mean, I guess you could do them more parallel, but again, part of KOTOR 2's whole thing is you're sort of inheriting the Ebon Hawk and all some of the companions from the first game, and putting a new spin on them and sort of taking this interesting idea of the Force. Like the KOTOR 2 and Krea's kind of lectures on what the Force is and is not are some of the most interesting like lore discussions in the entire Star Wars canon or non-canon of all time. My only idea there would be, unless they're talking about just doing a remake of both games back to back and making kind of one semi-cohesive package, the only thing I could think is that they're going to take more of the tone and sort of subversive viewpoints of what the Force and the Jedi and the Sith can be, and the Gray Jedi idea, which was introduced by this for the most part.
Yeah, it was.
You're going to take that and incorporate more of it into the KOTOR 1 story, because that mostly comes from 2. That comes from Avellone and Obsidian being let loose on this property. And KOTOR 1 is more of an evolution of sort of what we'd seen the Force and the Jedi and the Sith revealed to be in the prequels, written by writers for once instead of the prequels. But you play, I mean, this came out in 2003, and you play it, and you're like, it feels like old Star Wars, but it's incorporating the new canon ideas that came out of episodes 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But it's incorporating them in a way that makes it all kind of flow properly. And then KOTOR 2 is Chris Avellone basically deconstructing the entire Star Wars mythos and how the Force works and what that's about, in the context of a conflict between the Sith and the Jedi, and in the course of that conflict, the game doesn't really tell you which side you're on until halfway through the game.
Yeah.
And Darth Traya and/or Kreia is one of the greatest Star Wars characters ever made, because of that, because she has viewpoints on the Force that no one ever espoused before or since in some places. And I will say, I find it interesting if someone loves KOTOR 2 and hates The Last Jedi, because The Last Jedi takes a whole lot of ideas from KOTOR 2.
Yeah.
The idea that what Luke says in The Last Jedi, that if the idea that if the Jedi die, the Force dies, is vanity. That's Darth Kreia, right? That's Kreia right there. Like, the idea that the Jedi own the Force, the idea that the Sith own the Force, that the Force is something that works as a dualism, is nonsense, because it's more than that, and that's great. Like, that's a really cool idea that only KOTOR 2 really delved into much.
The other thing I would say too,
you take that stuff and make it more part of kind of the whole tapestry as you remake the first game, and I think that might be what they're talking about. Because I don't want to let myself hope that they're going to make both games, because that would be too awesome.
I mean, that's not what the rumor is suggesting. The rumor is suggesting is combining the two into one product. And one thing I would say that shines positively for the prospects for a KOTOR in 2021 or 2022, whenever it comes, is The Mandalorian. Mm-hmm. Because I kind of had this preconceived notion in my head that anything Star Wars related that doesn't include Luke and Leia and Han and Chewbacca and all those characters that everybody loves isn't doomed to failure, but probably isn't going to be as successful
no.
as. But no, that's not how it works at all.
That's exactly why Lucasfilm had to go back to the drawing board after these movies, because they thought that too, and they thought that you had to put things that people recognized in there. You had to put even when you made Rogue One, you had to have Vader show up and do the.
Even Mandalorian, like a lot of people, like the promotion for it makes it look like it's a Boba Fett show.
But The Mandalorian is so much better than anything Boba Fett has ever done in anything ever.
Yeah. He's always been a big character. Like, he's never been a big part of it.
No, of course not. He just looked cool.
Yeah.
And he was the thing that people forget about Boba Fett is that he was the first Empire Strikes Back action figure you could get because he was the mail-away promotion.
He was also awesome. He was like the one everybody wanted.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He looks cool, but he doesn't do anything in the movies. He stands around. He follows Han. He complains to Vader. He misses Luke with his shots. He flies away, and then he hangs out at Jabba's palace for a year, and then he closes the distance between himself and a melee fighter with an invincible melee weapon, and then falls in a pit and screams. Yeah. That's it. That's all he does.
You're right.
Like, Boba Fett is
he
one
was
of the
like
most
a mythological.
useless.
He is, yeah, but people loved him. At least my whole
The
circle of friends
Mandalorian
loved
is like, here's a Mandalorian doing things that you think Boba Fett should do, and actually doing it. And the best thing about The Mandalorian in terms of like kind of incorporating older things and like kind of nostalgic stuff is it does it and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like there's a scene in Mandalorian where a bunch of stormtroopers roll up in a troop transport, and the troop transport is it's based on an old toy from back in the day, because Kenner kept running out of vehicles to make because there weren't that many vehicles in the movie, so they would just make up new vehicles to sell in the years between movies. Because
I remember the troop transport.
And it was like basically you had a bunch of stormtroopers in buckets on the side of the stupid transport.
Yeah.
And I had that, and I thought it was dumb, but like I had a lot of stormtroopers to get places.
Yeah.
And then that thing rolls up in that fucking scene, and I'm just like, that's amazing. But if you don't know what that is, that scene doesn't lose anything. Because you don't need to. No one's going to look at that scene like, what is that? Why do I not know that? What's the point? You might say it if you're sitting next to me, and I'm like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, even going back to like the launch of the N64 with Shadows of the Empire, that game sold like crazy.
Yeah.
It was just Star Wars. Everyone knew it didn't have all, and that was even back then when people were really tied to these characters. So if it could work back then, it could absolutely work today. And I just think people are more accepting if they discover a universe that they like. People are much more apt today than they were 20 years ago to just dive into anything related to that universe. I think that's been kind of a seismic shift in pop culture, sort of.
Yep. Also, I did not when I replayed KOTOR 1. KOTOR 1 had one of my favorite lines in the history of video games, and I didn't know how I was going to feel about it hearing it again after like 15 years, but it's still great. It's one of the side quest guys gets like basically betrayed, and his droids like are reprogrammed to kill him, like float around him in a circle and kill him. When you walk up, you find him he's on Tatooine. I think you walk up close enough, and it triggers the cutscene for him to ask you for help, and he goes, "Hey there, could you help? I seem to be doomed." And I'm like,
pretty great.
God, that's just every RPG side quest character in the history of video games right there. It's like I just loved how it just lays that out.
Yeah, the voice acting will definitely need to be redone for this game. The writing's fine. It almost sounds like amateurs recorded some of the VO.
Also, part of it is also because recording equipment's better now.
You're right.
Like sound quality,
you can actually hear how hollow the voices
and you can fit better sound files on these things.
Yeah. You got a big hard drive. You got Blu-rays.
They were slapping those things on DVDs back in the day.
Yep, they had to compress.
And there's a lot of dialogue in that game.
Absolutely.
You didn't install anything back then.
Yep. So there you go. KOTOR and KOTOR 2 reportedly coming as one product. There's no release date announced yet. There's no platforms announced yet. Nothing's been officially announced at all. So
I still say something Star Wars is coming this fall, and we don't know what it is yet. Might be this, might be something else. But I think EA is going to prioritize getting Star Wars content in the pipeline, especially after what Fallen Order did.
Yep.
So I just hope they don't rush something stupid up there and it's all terrible.
I don't think that they'll allow that to happen.
Yeah,
at this point,
I think
it learned some hard lessons.
Yeah, I think they know.
Yeah,
like I'm very happy with Fallen Order, but my eyes is still on you.
Yeah, you're not off the hook yet.
Yeah,
not yet.